Richard Wolff reveals something that many had already felt in their daily lives. But few had the courage to say out loud. Trump's situation is much more serious than it seems. His government promised prosperity but delivered inequality, debt, and insecurity. Millions of families realized that the pretty numbers were just a facade, while real life became harder. But before starting this video, check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because every day there's a new video. Exposing the entire farce of the Trump administration. Donald Trump always liked to present himself as the great champion of the American economy. He spoke of the US economy as if it were the brightest trophy on his shelf. Something he had conquered alone, and that proved his superiority. In speeches, interviews, and even in quick Twitter posts, he repeated the same points: stock market records, massive corporate profits, and low unemployment rates. For him, all of this was proof that he was winning. But when you remove the makeup and look closely at what was really happening, you realize the reality was not as beautiful as the numbers he liked to show. The stock market, for example, was his favorite argument. Whenever it hit a new record, Trump celebrated as if it were a victory for the whole country. But the stock market is not the real economy. It's a space where the richest play, buying and selling stocks. And who plays this game? Basically, the richest 10% of Americans. This means that the vast majority of working families felt absolutely nothing when the index went up. The life of the average citizen doesn't improve just because a share of Apple or Facebook is worth more. Workers remain worried about wages, rent, groceries, and health insurance. In other words, what Trump sold as national prosperity was, in practice, the enrichment of a small elite. And there's more. Much of this stock market growth didn't come from incredible inventions or more quality jobs. It came from a cheap money policy. The US central bank, called the Federal Reserve, kept interest rates very low. This made it easy for companies to take out gigantic loans at low cost. But instead of investing that money in new factories, research, or creating stable jobs, many companies used the resources to repurchase their own shares. This financial trick artificially inflated stock prices, so it looked like the market was strong. But it was like blowing air into a balloon. It grows, but creates nothing concrete to support families. Trump also loved to talk about the job market. It's true that more jobs were created, but the question is, what kind of jobs were these? Most were low quality. We're talking about jobs with low wages, temporary contracts, often without rights, without benefits, and without stability. Unionization kept falling, and millions of people entered what we call the gig economy, or app economy. This means working as a ride-hailing driver, food delivery courier, freelancer on digital platforms, with no guarantee of steady income, no health insurance, no paid vacations, no job security. It's work, yes, but precarious work. And when a crisis hits, this type of job disappears like smoke. This is where propaganda and real life collide. Trump used statistics to boast, but families' new reality didn't match the speech. Millions of people were in debt, paying increasingly expensive rent, struggling to maintain health insurance, dealing with extremely high costs in schools and universities. The average salary had been practically stagnant for years, while prices kept rising. This gap between official numbers and real life created distrust. Trump believed he could sustain his image with pretty tables and charts, but he forgot that reality knocks at the door, and when it does, the makeup comes off. Another important detail. Trump didn't invent this unequal system on his own. He inherited an economy already structured to favor big corporations and but by tying his reputation directly to these superficial indicators, he also tied his image to the wear and tear. The Trump economy looked like a lit-up stage, shiny and flashy on the outside. Inside, supported by fragile cardboard sets. When the curtain fell, what was revealed was a show of appearances, not a solid construction. Debt is another heavy chapter of this story. During his government, public debt skyrocketed, and so did household debt. Tax cuts for the richest and for big corporations reduced government revenue and increased deficits. Meanwhile, families, with stagnant wages, relied more and more on credit cards, student loans, and mortgages. This created an artificial sense of prosperity. People bought, traveled, consumed but on borrowed money, and any system based on debt only works up to a point. One day, the bill comes due. Installments expire, interest rates rise, collectors come knocking, and that's exactly what started to happen. The castle that Trump sold as solid was, in practice, a house of cards, pretty until the wind changes. And then there was foreign policy. Trump launched the idea of America first, meaning putting US interests above everything else. It looked like strength at first, imposing tariffs, starting trade wars, pressuring allies. But the world doesn't work in isolation. The global economy is like a network, cutting one thread affects many others. When Trump attacked China, for example, American farmers, who depended on selling grain to the Chinese, suddenly lost their market. What looked like strength turned into isolation, and in an interconnected world, isolation is costly. A central point in evaluating any economy is inequality, and under Trump, it not only persisted but deepened. The rich got richer, especially after tax cuts and rising stock values. Meanwhile, the poorer half saw almost no improvement. This gap wasn't created by him alone, but his policies accelerated the divide. And inequality has a heavy price. It fuels resentment, drives political polarization, and erodes people's trust in government. The famous promise of "Make America Great Again" rang hollow when most Americans felt excluded from this supposed greatness. The COVID-19 pandemic was the final test, and it exposed all the weaknesses that had been hidden behind the statistics. The economy, already dependent on fragile jobs and growing debt, couldn't withstand the shock. Millions lost jobs, small businesses closed, supply chains broke down. Instead of showing strength, the system revealed its fragility, and Trump's response only made it worse. He downplayed risks, shifted responsibility, spoke of improvised solutions. The result was more insecurity. Those who suffered the most were precisely the workers he claimed to protect. Meanwhile, billionaires expanded their fortunes during the pandemic, further fueling the sense of injustice. In the end, Trump wanted to be remembered as the businessman president who brought prosperity, but the narrative doesn't match the facts. What remains is the image of a government that inflated superficial numbers, increased dependence on debt, deepened inequalities, wore down international relations, and left families more vulnerable. The risk for him is that these problems did not disappear when he left office. They continue, and in many cases, they are even more serious. With high inflation, crushing debt, and workers demanding better conditions, the gap between promises and reality has become impossible to hide. Trump staked his image on an already fragile economy. When that fragility broke, it wasn't just the economy that suffered, but also the credibility of the man who claimed to have everything under control.